Hey folks, I just finished a very lengthy series on genocide in the Bible, and I was very surprised or astonished by the amount of PMs and comments I received from atheists and agnostics venting at the immorality of it all, or the immorality of the God of the Old Testament. Now, typically, naturalists and secular humanists, such as atheists and agnostics, typically fall into one of three camps when it comes to morality. First, you have the moral nihilist who says that nothing is moral or immoral. And I would like to say I think this is the most consistent point of view, especially from a secular humanist perspective. Then you have the moral relativist who says that there are no moral or objective moral truths. In other words, moral truths are subjective, and you arrive at those through either context or culture. The vast majority of atheists and agnostics fall into this camp. And then you have the moral objectivist or a universalist who says that certain morals are universal to all people. I believe more and more atheists are trying to embrace this point of view because they realize the bankruptcy of the other two points of view when it comes to morality. But of the three camps, the moral objectivist has the toughest sell to make in regards to his naturalism or secular humanism because there is no tangible moral standard in which to base their morality. Now, they may attempt to base morality on self-evident moral facts, but from a secular humanist point of view, at best, it is debatable that there are moral facts to begin with, and even so, it is debatable whether those moral facts are in fact self-evident. Now, typically, a moral objectivist has to make some type of appeal to populum, and thus commit the logical fallacy of ad populum, or the fallacy in which where right or wrong are determined by majority rule. Again, this is an outright logical fallacy, or at best, just state that moral objectivism is possible and then revert back to some type of subjective moral relativism. At the end of the day, the best that a secular humanist has to offer when it comes to morality is a moral system based on relative and subjective criteria, or no morality at all. Today, most atheists and agnostics, as I've already pointed out, fall into the moral relativist camp anyway, and ultimately secular humanism teaches us that morality is relative, and it teaches us this because it has to. Now, moral relativism teaches us that we cannot condemn other cultures for their moral actions or moral codes just because we have a different perspective. Because cultures are simply collections of people, to avoid the ad populum fallacy again, the argument has to be extended to the individual. And just because you and I have a different perspective on right and wrong than does any other person does not mean that we can condemn them from their personal moral codes or for their personal moral codes. The end result of such a philosophy is that there really isn't any right or wrong at all to begin with. Now, if we can conclude that morality is relative and subjective, how can an atheist, agnostic, or any type of secular humanist honestly attack Christianity using moral indignation over the slaughters that took place in Numbers 31, 1 Samuel 15, and other places in the Old Testament? What would happen if we removed the emotion from the issue? What would an open and logical examination of the topic yield? Now, Moses obviously thought killing the Midianites in Numbers 31 was a good thing to do. Moses and Joshua thought killing the Canaanites in the books of Deuteronomy and Joshua was a good thing to do. And Samuel and Saul in 1 Samuel 15 thought killing the Amalekites was a good thing to do. Just as Osama bin Laden thought it was a good thing to kill 3,000 Americans by flying airplanes into the trade towers, and just as the United States thought it was the right thing to do to drop 2 atomic bombs on Japan to end World War II. The question is this: is killing a human being always wrong? If so, is this not a declaration of a moral absolute? Isn't a moral absolute a direct contradiction of moral relativism? And if so, is moral relativism wrong? If a secular humanist wants to claim a moral absolute, what is their basis for this? How can they know without appealing to some type of subjective reasoning or logical fallacy? Is it proper to make the observation that different cultures have different moral values, and then make the statement that they are immoral simply because their morals differ from our own? We must admit that if we admit this, then we are immoral then we may very well be immoral by another culture's standards, and hopefully we can see at this point the resulting hypocrisy. When I first read Numbers 31 and 1 Samuel 15, it seems natural to want to condemn Moses, Samuel, and the God that commanded them to kill those people. But what makes our opinion on the matter carry any more weight than Moses's or Samuel's opinion that these wars were good and proper moral decisions. Is there no such thing as a just war? We may decide at the end of the day there isn't. However, what gives our opinion on the matter any more authority than those who think that wars can be and are just, or sometimes just? How then can a person who accepts secular humanism's view of morality be in a position to condemn Moses, Samuel, or God as described in the Old Testament? In simple terms, such condemnation merely exposes the personal bias and emotionalism of the secular humanist. If one presupposes God doesn't exist, then one will be quick to condemn God for his actions, even if the result is hypocrisy. On the other hand, if a secular humanist is fair-minded and true to the only real moral philosophy he can hold, that being moral relativism, he will take the time to see the moral perspective from the other side. You know, when we read the Old Testament, we discover the Canaanites are described as wicked. What this means, basically, is that the moral culture of the Canaanites differed dramatically from the moral culture of the Israelites. It is known, for example, that the people of Canaan sacrificed their babies by placing them on the red-hot hands of a heated statue to their god. It is known that they practiced incest and bestiality. The Canaanites was a war culture and were known for their unprovoked attacks against their peaceful neighbors. Their standards of honesty, respect for life, and sanctity of marriage were different than that from Israel's. So in the books of Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua, we read that Moses and Joshua tried to prevent with warfare was the unpalatable mixing of the two diametrically opposed societies. Now, if a person honestly thought that sacrificing babies was wrong, how would they feel when they saw this practice spreading, perhaps even seeing some of their own people who had married into the other culture performing this act on their own children? Of course, they would be outraged, but from the Canaanites' point of view, to not be able to sacrifice children to their God was equally offensive and wrong. In Numbers 25, we see that this intermarrying between the Israelites and the Midianites was starting to take place, and that this trend seems to reoccur with the Canaanites in Deuteronomy and Joshua. Moses did not want his people to become as wicked as the Canaanites, and so he did what he thought was proper. He destroyed all whom he considered to be a threat to his culture. The men and women were killed because they both fought to have their way of life preserved. The children were killed because they would grow up resenting the Israelites and cause problems later on. The only exception was in Numbers 31, where the young girls are spared for two reasons. One, Israel had the resources to absorb them due to the loss of 24,000 Israelites, and the girls were not seen as much of a threat as young boys because they would have formed bonds and babies with their captors and become absorbed into the culture. Now, when there's a clash of cultures with diametrically opposed values, there can be no peace. We see this playing out in the Middle East. The Western world believes in freedom for all through democracy. Islam believes in submission to God for all through theocracy. Likewise, 4,000 years ago, Israel wanted all to have its values and worship its God, and the Canaanites wanted to have all their values and worship their gods. Any compromise would have been found unacceptable on both sides. Now, the liberal mindset in the United States today is that war is to be a gentle act of persuasion, and those who win any war fought with weapons are monsters, and those who lose are noble victims. But no matter the cause of war, at its height, at the instance when the battle can either go either way, and at the moment when both sides fear they will lose, both sides, if given the weapons and the option, would logically choose to annihilate the enemy. Can you imagine a Canaanite leader, his people dead and dying, and the Israelites moving in saying, "Gee, we can win this war, but we respect the life so much we won't destroy the lives of our enemies. We'll just lie down and die for them." The fact of the matter is the Canaanites were not noble victims. They fought hard, and they would have loved to kill every Israelite to have wiped them off the planet. They were not peaceful villages that were one day attacked by vicious hordes of Jews. They were constantly waging war, burning Israel's crops and leaving them with nothing to eat, and as well as repeating the same offenses to other nations around them on a regular basis. In my opinion, the war was a just war, and I gave 33 videos to represent why I believe it was a just war. I would especially embrace this if I were a secular moral relativist. I find it laughable when a person 4,000 years after the fact, sitting in their climate-controlled home, watching TV, and one who adheres to some type of humanist philosophy of naturalism such as atheism or agnosticism, which at best can only offer moral relativism, emphatically claims that God was immoral for having conducted such a war. The bottom line is that a secular humanist has no honest moral basis in which to rant about how immoral the Christian's God is, and to do so is hypocrisy and logically inconsistent at best.